Hi there. I'm Professor Greg Marsden from the Institute for Transport Studies at the University of Leeds. And this is a recording of a presentation I gave to the Mobility Ways ZC3 conference today on 12th of October. So before I move into my role for the day, which is to act as the Secretary of State for a new imaginary department for sustainable commuting, I thought I'd explain why I've decided to give my talk in that framing. There's something wrong with how we make transport policy. As the past month has shown, when push comes to shove, transport policy is about who gets what funding for what transport scheme, where. And so, whilst we might all subscribe to the idea that travel is a derived demand, that is, we only travel because we want to go somewhere to do something, and we even collect statistics to that effect, I would suggest that what we decide to do and how we assess what to do really marginalizes this fundamental insight. So I'm going to place you inside my thought experiment, and I apologize for the lack of Union Jack flags in the background. So we're going to imagine that we've no longer got a Department for Transport. That's been dissolved, and we've instead got departments for sustainable commuting, sustainable tourism, etc. And underneath that, somewhere is an executive agency tasked with building the things which help fulfill the goals of these other departments. So it's with great pleasure that I now set out the plan for the first 100 days of the new Department for Sustainable Commuting. So the first thing we hold at the front of our mind at the DFSC is that commuting matters. It matters to people, it matters to businesses, it matters to the economy, and of course, to the planet. I asked my lead advisor, Sir Ali of Claiborne, for some headline statistics on the cost of the commute. It's estimated that £8 billion is lost to the economy from congestion in terms of wasted time on the network. Most of that is concentrated in the morning and evening peaks as a result of the commute. I was also surprised to find out that each year employees spend around £25 billion on commuting, with fares, fees, fuel, and vehicle costs, etc. Perhaps less well known is that almost 10% of families own a car just to be able to participate in the labour market. We know this because they are the same families who cannot afford even a single week of holiday, and that number has probably grown as a result of the cost of living crisis. The commute is a major social cost to all parts of society, as well as being fundamental to our way of lives. Not only is it a major social cost, but the commute costs businesses. It costs them directly in terms of providing parking spaces, the land for cars to sit on, the security to look after them. And it costs them because poor commutes lead to poor productivity and to a loss of staff and additional recruitment costs. Providing for the commute in the way we do seems to me to place an unnecessary burden on business. Why do we tolerate this? I asked my officials what the direction of travel was here, and excuse the terrible transport pun there. The Department of Transport had been looking at this for years. Surely there were some approaches there that we could build on. I was shocked. Since 2015, speeds across the network have got slower by an average of 4%. This is even worse in the peak hours. I looked at the national road traffic projections from late 2022, and in some scenarios this is forecast to get 30% worse by 2030, and staggeringly 70% worse by 2050. It seems that we're anticipating more traffic, which is seen to be a sign of economic progress. Yet, the very thing which is supposed to be indicative of a strong economy looks certain to make things worse for businesses and for the commute, which is a bedrock of our economy. But these are just projections, so there must have been a plan to sort this out. And there was. The problem is, it's the same plan that's been in place since the 1980s, and it has not worked. I was reminded of Prime Minister Cameron's announcement that the Conservatives would instigate the biggest road building programme since the 1970s. Money was specifically ring-fenced in the budget for a roads investment strategy. What's been achieved? Well, in that period, we've managed to build 8.6 miles of motorway a year and 30.6 miles of A roads. This is less than half of 1% of the network every year, and even less than that for non-motorways. How could such a glacial pace of road building possibly be the answer to anything? And let us be clear, there is no route forward where I, as Secretary of State for Sustainable Commuting, could advocate going faster. We have climate obligations, and we'll spend more money in court than we would do on the roads. There's also no public appetite for a large-scale roads programme. And even if you thought all of that were unimportant or could be somehow surmounted, it still won't work as a strategy. It was understood in the early 1990s that we cannot predict and provide for roads and make things better. We simply could never build enough road capacity to stop congestion getting worse. Why has this been forgotten? Partly, I believe, because we've had a department which was focused on accessing money for infrastructure rather than concentrating on the role that infrastructure plays in our economy and our daily lives. But I thought, hang on, there must be some good news. We have smart motorways now. I know because I've been caught in their construction for what seems like forever. But then I found out we don't have smart motorways. I was informed that the average car occupancy in the morning peak is just 1.1, and that it's fallen 5% in the past 20 years. So we've spent all that money expanding our roads by an incremental amount in order to put more bits of metal along them, but not, it turns out, many more people. That's not a smart motorway. It's not, I suggest, therefore, that there's a need for more road capacity to deliver a better commute, but a different attitude to the precious road space that we have. 120 billion empty seat miles are driven every year in the commute just by those people who are commuting by themselves. And there are many more seats in other cars too. There has to be better ways. Now, some people advocate road user charging as a silver bullet to cut congestion. We will, I suggest, move towards a pay per mile system because electric vehicles will need to somehow pay for the costs that they produce, and we need to replace fuel duty. However, we will not be moving to a pay per minute and by time of day system anytime soon. The pandemic showed that 50% of people cannot work from home, whereas the other 50% could, at least some of the time. If we charge for driving in the peak, then this will cause gross unfairness, and that's not what my department is after. So, what are we proposing? The first thing we're proposing is a rethink of approach. This guy knew a thing or two, and so we will not be going back to the biggest roads programme since the Romans or the Victorians or the 1970s or whichever narrative you'd prefer. It won't work. More seriously, and just jumping out of character for a second, we need to undermine the claim that somehow infrastructure expansion is the answer. This is something which infects all political parties, and I commend the Welsh Government for their pragmatic approach to thinking through when infrastructure expansion can be justified in a climate emergency. Anyway, back to the script. Our plan puts the needs of businesses and workers together with our goals for the economy, social equity, and the carrying capacity of the planet. It puts them at the heart of what we do. And if you think this is a horrible depiction, I invite you to look at the iconography of the plan for drivers from the dying days of the Department for Transport. It's much worse. So, and obviously all of these proposals are fully costed, and you can find the details in our manifesto. Our infrastructure spend is going to rely on rebalancing of funds, which had previously been dedicated to road expansion, and instead we'll be focusing on road utilisation. First, national highways will be given a network efficiency duty, which requires them to drive up the number of people which can be moved around the network during peak hours. So people rather than vehicles. This will mean starting with the basics of counting such matters so that we can track performance. There is huge potential to join up journeys along busy stretches of our motorways and major roads. We are a many point to many point society, and aggregating demand can be difficult for individuals. However, we've built some natural funnels, roads, which bring that demand together. We now need to unleash the opportunities to share that. We've reallocated funding from road expansion to construct a network of parkway-style park and ride sites, which will enable car sharing and express coach services to serve key markets. They'll also open up new vehicle charging opportunities and, where sensible, act as mobility hubs. We will give all local authorities a fund for infrastructure, which supports the move to shared transport. This will include better provision at and en route to our new hub network, at other public transport interchanges, and to massively expand the mobility hub ambitions they have. We need a system which says, use the right mix of vehicles and modes for your journey, rather than the old car versus public transport trope. To that end, we'll also set new standards to ensure that e-scooters and other forms of personal light electric mobility are safe and can be taken on public transport. We'll provide revenue support for demand-responsive transport trials for areas where the labour market is not well served by the existing public transport system, and where businesses, local authorities and providers see a real gap that needs addressing. We, the public sector, will lead on this agenda. Governments at all scales, the NHS and universities are some of the biggest employers in towns and cities. On average, across the economy, we represent around 18% of the workforce, and in some areas that can be as high as 30%. There will be a requirement to improve the commute experience and reduce the costs of the commute to the economy and the public purse. Businesses want to do more too, but they're not all specialists at travel planning. We'll fund a programme of workplace travel plan coordinators or services which can support businesses. This will harness the hundreds of millions of pounds which businesses themselves are planning to spend on their own transitions to net zero. But we will join this up for better and better value for money outcomes. This is critical because, as I said earlier, you cannot expect the public purse alone to fund the transition at the pace we need. Partnership matters, and it's to be embraced. We will see real innovation with locally targeted solutions that help improve the working environment for firms. On this note, rather than counting the costs of the time spent on the journey to work as somehow a measure of the importance of the commute, we must understand how commuting impacts on productivity and the wider quality of life of workers. We'll establish major trials which explore how different commuting approaches impact these key factors, including the balance between working in the office and working remotely. It's impossible to believe, given the seismic shifts that happened to working practices during and after the pandemic, that we had no strategic direction in the return to work and how that should best be managed in the joint interests of businesses, transport providers, congestion, and the environment. And finally, we look over the channel to the amazing work being done by the French government to drive up car sharing. There's no need to be ashamed of this. In particular, they're incentivizing people to start using their car sharing platform with a Primo initiative, and we would seek to mimic that. Business rates will be another policy that we'll address. If we want a new system, then we have to change the old tax rules and incentives that made commuting by car the default. So we're not going to increase business rates, but instead we're going to ring fence a proportion of recent increases for commuting measures, in line with the productivity gains that we can expect in return for businesses. We will stop the ludicrous perk, which hides in plain sight, of free parking provision. If you have a single occupancy parking place at work, then this will be seen as a taxable benefit from late in 2025. Every penny will be reinvested in supporting a better commute. We'll phase out benefit in kind support for zero emission vehicles from 2027, so we're not incentivizing car buying once the cost of EVs has fallen closer to their fossil fuel equivalents. We'll also address some of the complexities over how pool cars and car sharing are treated in the tax regime, so that it enables new and innovative models to emerge, which support greater sharing during the commute. My message to you today is simple. We cannot go on as we were. It's a failed model, and it needs calling out as such. I believe there is a better way. This means looking at the commute as a key activity in the economy and a key social issue. What I've set out today is the plan for commuters, but it's also the plan for businesses. It's a plan for the economy. And given how fundamental this is, it's also a plan for the planet. We have to do more with less, and we have to start the task today and with urgency. Thank you.